you will recall that we could use parameters in Tableau to change the measure that was displayed. And you will recall that we first created the parameter and then a calculated value to determine which measure to display. We can do something very similar in Power BI using a slicer and a measure. So to illustrate how to do this, I'm first going to create a new measure. And we're going to call that death moving average. And the formula we're going to use is very similar to the one that we did for moving average. So we need to calculate, but now what we're going to do is we're going to take the sum of the 2021 deaths. Okay, and then we're going to calculate it over the same period. We're going to start with the 2021 event date. We'll calculate it from the first date in that date. We're going to calculate it over the periods moving window by day, and then obviously we're still going to want to divide that by periods moving window to get an actual moving average. And it's calculating it, and we seem to be okay. Let's just test it out. So I'm going to go into a new page, create a line chart. Let's stick that here. And that line chart should have the event date in there. Again, set as the real event date. Then the y-axis should be the death moving average. The secondary axis should be the just the normal moving average. Then we're going to add a slicer to this. You make this a little smaller, obviously. And that slicer is going to contain the moving the period. Okay, we can make it smaller still. And then let's see what happens when we change this to daily or to monthly. And you see that both of them more or less move in parallel. And interesting, early in the epidemic, the deaths seem to be, just following a peak in cases. Later in the epidemic, it's really dropping. So it looks as if we're getting better at dealing with COVID later on in the epidemic. Now, what we want to do is create again a new visualization. We start with a slicer where again we put the period in there. And then the second slicer should tell us which parameter, which measure we're going to show. So I'm going to create new data, and I'm just going to call that measure dimension, or call it measure to display. And that's only going to have two values, namely deaths and cases. And we're just going to call this measures, doesn't really matter. I'm going to load this. And now you see we have these measures here as well. So what I'm going to do is add a new slicer. And then put measure to display in there. So you see we have two options now, cases and deaths. It has again ordered them alphabetically, but that's okay. That's not a problem in this case. Now, second thing we now need to do is to create a new measure called measure selection that will look at the value of the measure to display slicer, and then determine on basis on that what the measure to be displayed should be. So I'm going to stick that in here, measure, and I'm going to call that measure displayed. And what we're going to say is that if and has one value, and then we need to go to measure to display. If it has a single value, and that values is depths, then we will display the we can go do that. Depth moving average, and otherwise we're going to display just the regular moving average. Okay, so again, what we're going to do here is we're going to say if there is a value, then and that value happens to be equal to depths, then we're going to show the depth moving average. Otherwise, we're going to show the moving average. So, so there's two circumstances under which we would move moving average, display moving average. Namely, if this is selected, if cases is selected here, or if there is no selection here. And it's kind of important when you build a slicer that you make sure that you know what you're going to do if the slicer is empty. Anyway, we'll now add a line chart to the report. And I'm going to stick that here. And that line chart again takes the event date as its y-axis. Again, we're going to set that to event date. And now what I'm going to put in the y-axis is the measure displayed. That is the measure we just selected. And at the moment, it seems that I have the moving average, 5-day moving average for cases. If I select depths, then you see it becomes the 5-day moving average for depths. And I can mess around with the other slicer as well. So monthly, daily, again, go to cases, and you'll see that nothing happens when I clear the selections because the measure has been set up in such a way that if there is no value in the measures to display slicer, it will go to cases automatically.